Gotta love those green onions. Welcome back, Home Wizards, here every Saturday from 2 to 4 to help you enjoy those spaces you call home more. We call it home, garden, and life improvement. I'm Cindy Dole. The number is 888-KFWB 980, 888-539-2980. You might want to call in because, boy, it's your chance to figure out those September garden to-dos. And with me is a woman who is helping us not feel the guilt if we're not successful all the time in the garden. She's a horticulturist of the year, Yvonne Savio, who works also with Common Ground, with the Cooperative Extension, Los Angeles, UC Davis, and she writes for garden.org, teaching classes. The list goes on, right? And you said that when you grew up, the whole victory garden thing was really part of your DNA, right? Your mom and dad said, hey, whatever's in the garden, that's we're eating tonight.
That's right, and that's what determined what we ate. You know, we'd have a lot of going to the critters, that found it, of course, 2-3 days before we were going to pick it. But absolutely, just what was in the garden was what we played with, and that's what we ate. Not completely, but, we had about... I guess it's up a hillside in Pasadena, and it's maybe 1/4 of an acre, which is a large space of land. But the first thing my folks did was terrace it, and they planted about 20 fruit trees. And my dad didn't allow my mom to grow anything between the fruit trees because he wanted all that energy to go to the fruit trees. But there were a couple spaces that were going to be vegetable areas, and that's where she did the tomatoes and the squash and the cucumbers and all that stuff. When I moved back home, I had started a lot of gardening up in Davis when I was working at the university up there. And it had gotten really popular at the time. The first 4 inches of perennials were available commercially. And so I had a tremendous garden that was all perennials. And when we knew we were going to move back down here, my husband said, why are you messing with all these plants? Because I was potting them up, in anticipation of bringing them down here. Why are you messing with all the plants? You can buy them again. You should be packaging up all the soil. And, he was really smart because, of course, I had been building that soil for some 20 years that we lived there with mulch and compost and manure and all that good stuff. You were
composting then, huh?
Oh, yeah. Well, I grew up on Organic Gardening Magazine, so of course I knew all about compost and mulch and all the bioactivity in the soil and all that good stuff. And it's so easy to do because you just get whatever organic stuff is available, even if it's just your leaves or your grass clippings, assuming you haven't, put a lot of nasty stuff on your grass clippings.
Right.
And then you just pile it on in very, very thin layers because grass, especially when it's newly mown, it's extremely moist and it's the perfect nitrogen. So you have to spread it very, very thinly. Literally, how would I describe? Real thin.
Pixie dust.
There you go. Green pixie dust. And because each of those little pieces, the little blades, have to dry completely separate from all the other ones. Mm-hmm. If you do it too thick, they'll dry into an impervious mat, and it will stink underneath, and it'll shed all of the water on top. So you have to do it very simply, sprinkling it across the space, and therefore it'll all dry up individually, and then it will decompose into the soil. But here my husband had been so aware of all the hauling of good stuff that I had brought to the garden and incorporated into the soil, so that was really the magic of the garden,
Well, for those of us who are listening and our soil isn't that great, what advice would you give to folks in terms of getting that going for September so we can plant some veggies and such?
Yeah, now is a great time. Whatever kind of organic matter you can locate, chop it up in little pieces, an inch square, even if it's just a broccoli plant or that squash plant or something else that you have been growing. Just chop it up kind of helter-skelter. Don't make a big thing out of it. But the smaller the pieces means the more surface area, which then can get all these micronutrients or the microorganisms in there to start literally decomposing it. And so it will break down much quicker than if you sheet composting, because you're putting real thin layers, sheets of each one of these different kinds of items, the organic matter, onto an area, whether it's 4x8 or 2x2 or whatever size it is. And you just keep piling that stuff on. And as the under stuff breaks down, the top stuff, you're kind of doing a whole layering thing. And keeping it moist, like a wrung-out sponge, is the a good way to visualize it. And it just breaks down, and all those nutrients get into the soil, and that's then with the new roots from the new plants.
And for those of us without any yard per se, we do the same theory for a container?
Sure.
Yeah?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But the critical part is that it's small bits, and it just keep layering it.
Keep layering.
And especially over the summer and any hot time, that mulch, that layering that you're doing, is providing all that shade, and it does a multitude of things. It breaks down and provides nutrients. It shades the soil so that it doesn't dry out. It doesn't heat up as much. So the plants are more comfortable there, and they grow better. And weeds can't come up because they're not open to the light as they were in bare soil. And it moderates the temperatures of the soil so that the roots grow better. And so it's just all around the perfect stuff to add, even in a container.
It sounds great. 888-KFWB-980 if you're just joining us, talking with Yvonne Savio, who's really quite the gardening expert. Maybe you're thinking about doing something, you're having a challenge in your yard. You can call on in at 888-KFWB-980. And so you were talking earlier about, in terms of picking veggies, and there are many that we could be thinking of, including tomatoes still, to put in the ground or in a container now through the month of September, to not buy the big ones, the big plants, but to pick the smaller ones because they're going to be more adaptable.
Right, exactly.
And then to do the trifecta watering 3 times, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And what else should we be thinking of in terms of just our to-dos for veggie gardening?
Well, the other thing to kind of protect those transplants a little is after you do the watering, then get a piece of cardboard, or like the container from a half gallon of milk, and fold it flat and put it stand it upright on the south side of the plant, so that you've done it in the late afternoon, you've watered it in, you've given it this little bit of shade on the south side. The next day, when it gets that full brunt of the sun, and its little roots have just barely begun to say, "Oh, now this is home, so I can start growing again."
It's
and
kind of
reconnecting.
traumatic.
Sure,
it's like anything. It's a shock.
That sun you want to keep away from really beating down on that plant, at least for the first week or so. And that's why you're putting that shade piece on the south side, because that's when the sun will be the most intense, and that poor little plant will say, "Ah!"
So it's like you're creating a little patio umbrella.
Exactly. Yeah.
Let's go to the phones. Roberta is calling in from West Covina. Hey there, Roberta. She's still being set up. Roberta,
from the County Garden Club. My question is pertaining to growing from seeds. I have had 0 success with seeds. I do all container gardenings because my backyard's a concrete slab, and I can get them perhaps an inch, or if I'm lucky, even that. But after that, they just die off. I don't know what I'm doing. I've tried whiskey barrels. I've tried vinyl planters. I've tried wooden boxes. Obviously, I'm doing something wrong because I can grow vegetables in earth boxes.
You may be running into what's called damping off.
Okay.
And it's a fungus that develops on the soil surface when it's too watered. It's just too moist. And they kind of just keel over right at the base where they connect with the soil.
Or they shrivel up.
Yeah. You have to use a sterile potting mix. This is not soil from the garden. This is the one time when you're starting seed, you never want to use the soil from the garden because it potentially just has too many disease, spores, and just stuff that's flying around all the time.
Okay, yeah, very good.
So purchase some potting mix. Now, I prefer super soil, but it's it seems to have been changing its fertilizer content and also the size of the particles. I used to like it quite a few years ago when it was very, very tiny individual particles. Now it seems to have more of the bark pieces. It hasn't been decomposed as long as it used to be. But I still find that that's very good. But try to get a potting mix that has as small particles as possible and use an individual like 6-packs or something where you can really pay attention to putting very few of the seeds in each cell. Because the more it's crowded, the more likelihood that the air circulation is not going to be as good, and consequently the moisture that you have on there, because you want the seeds to germinate, is going to end up fostering the damping off.
And just curious, Roberta, what kind of veggies are you hoping to grow there with those seeds?
Well, with the seeds, I would prefer to do flowers.
Oh, for flowers.
Because my veggies, I have 10 earth boxes. I love them.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They wonderful.
Yeah. Well, hopefully this will help with the soil and all, right? Buying some of this great potting soil.
Right. Any particular, if you're growing, say, flowers in a container garden, do you have any preference? Vinyl, wood?
For the container?
Anything, or is the soil is really the critical thing?
You mean for the container?
Yeah, for the container.
To hold the moisture.
I have a very sunny backyard.
Yeah, you always want to choose a container that is deep.
Too much.
Sorry. You want to choose a container that is as deep as possible as you can manage, because that will enable the soil to be cooler and moisture toward the bottom of the container.
But clay pots are really bad, aren't they? Because the water all goes out and...
Well, it depends what you're growing, because some things really need good drainage. And so the clay pot does evaporate from the sides, unless it's been coated on the inside with some of that tar-looking stuff. But glazed pots do not do that evaporation, and so you won't have to water as frequently.
Thanks for calling in there, Roberta. Let's go. You got it. Have a good weekend. Maggie is calling in. It sounds like, Maggie, you've got a soil issue.
Hi, good afternoon. Actually, I live in Simi Valley, and I am interested in planting some trees. Fruit trees, maybe a citrus, avocado tree, but our yard is really rocky and it's dry. So I'm not quite sure where to start. My husband says, well, just pick 4 trees and take care of it. And it seems kind of complicated just because of the type of soil we have. It's just rock and dirt.
This is a great example of how university research has evolved. When I first started working for the university, it was all excited about incorporating organic matter as deeply as possible, so that the roots would have all this great nutrition to pull from. Then we found that what you were really doing when you dug in so much of the organic matter was that you were creating a big container. You literally would have dug out the soil, mixed it with organic matter, planted the tree, and then after it would rain, it would fill up with water, and then a wind would come and the whole thing would fall over.
If you can hold that thought, Maggie, don't you go away. We're going to hopefully give her some hope, right? For she can have some fruit trees even on that hill. Don't you leave. We're going to have more of that. Maybe you have a gardening question. You're listening to Home Wizards. I'm Cindy Dole. We're talking with one of the best. You can call on in at 888-539-2980, and we'll get Maggie's problem solved, I promise, right next here on Home Wizards. I'm Cindy Dole.